So here we are, early August 2016, in Slovakia at the annual meeting of the Rudolf Dreikurs Summer School. And I have the opportunity to be here with my good friend Dr. Frank Walton, who is one of the leaders at Akasi, has attended 37 different Akasis. So Frank, tell us about your experience with Akasi.
Well, I'm thinking I'd like to say that I was 3 years old when I first began to teach at Ikasi, but it may not be true. Paul, I was so fortunate to be invited in 1977 and then almost every year since. I missed a couple of years. I'm so fortunate because of the impact it can make on people's lives and it has made on my life to meet and live with and teach people from perhaps 25 nations and to become friends to the point that now, after all these years, I suspect that I have about as many friends in Europe as I do in America, and so we live together and study together. And Dreikurs, as you know, had the idea that we need to spread these ideas which are in the interest of mankind. But a secondary goal is that we break down artificial barriers so that it's not that I'm a Greek, I'm an American, I'm a Slovak. It's only that we are human beings studying and living together, and it's made a big impact through the years.
Yeah, it's 2 weeks of just celebrating the human experience with people from all over the world. It's really an amazing experience that doesn't happen often for most people, to be sure.
Yeah, and what happens, people might like to realize that there becomes what we might say mini Ikasis here and there. So before I came here this year, I was teaching in Ireland. So they had their Adlerian Summer Institute, which is somewhat patterned after what we have here. And it happens in the UK, and it happens in many countries, either institutes as long as perhaps a week in other countries, perhaps as short as a few days. But the ideas seem to, there's no question in my mind, through the years, they spread.
Yeah. Right now we're experiencing a unique time in our history, as a people, I suppose, and a lot of conflicts going on all over the world. What do you think is the importance of Adlerian Dreikursian psychology for today? For me, it seems more relevant and pertinent now than ever.
Well, I often work into any teaching that I'm doing, or even presentations to parents, how the closest we come to some guarantee that we will live in peace together is if we can develop what Adler says is a potential for every human being, and that is the capacity to learn to care about fellow human beings. And it starts shortly after birth, for it can be developed by mother and by father and spread in the family. So there's an idea that this is not all about me, but me and my mother, me and my family, me and others in the first grade, and continued on, me and the secondary school students, and finally, others in the world. We've got a ways to go, but it's so important. There's almost no other alternative that I know that is reasonable that we can really take steps towards world harmony. And it's having an impact. I wish it was faster, but we're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, it certainly is a fact that we are going to have to learn to cooperate with one another if we're continue to survive on the crust of this planet. I know in your own work, you obviously are making a tremendous contribution here at Akasi and at the many Akasis. I know that you teach a great deal internationally. I myself have been able to listen to you present many times over the years. You've also made a contribution back home in South Carolina. Tell us about your work in South Carolina.
Well, after I studied with Dreikers in 1960, is either 68 and 69 or 69 and 70, I was so fortunate to study with Dreikers, and he would teach through demonstrations, which I've, of course, tried to do through the years. But I was excited about bringing these ideas to South Carolina. And after, you may or may not know this, but after the second time I was at Chicago, I got a grant, applied for and obtained a grant to teach school counselors Adlerian principles. We called it Applications of Adlerian Psychology in the Home and School. And we had 2 courses in the capital city of South Carolina, Columbia, and 1 on the coast each summer for 18 years. So sometimes we had as many as 100 people in those courses. And I was able to bring down from Chicago a fellow who became my good friend, who was a terrific teacher and therapist, was Bob Powers.
Mm-hmm.
And then subsequently, also Harold Mozak, who was another fine therapist and teacher. And they would just come for a couple of days. I would teach the rest of the 3-week courses. But sometimes I realized the person who probably was benefiting the most from their coming was me, because I was learning from masters. So then, the same year, in 1974, I decided to leave the university. It seemed a little constraining to me, and I went into private practice. And the same year, my wife and I, my wife, who was a good but very young early childhood educator, she agreed to run the first Adlerian Child Care Center in kindergarten. And it was quite a success, because I had a lot of friends who knew me, studied with me, and they wanted their children to come to this center. So after 2 years, we built another center, and after 2 more years, another center. At one time, we had 8 centers in the capital of South Carolina, in Columbia. My wife Kathy was really the person who was the one who, you might say, was the executive officer, the coordinator, teacher, and lots of other things. I was more involved in finance and training of teachers and parents. So we trained our teachers to use these Adlerian techniques, and trained parents in the evening to use these Adlerian techniques. And what they consist of course, Paul Rasmussen knows better than most people, what they consist of essentially is helping children to be responsible and cooperative, and helping parents to understand when they are over controlling their children, when they are doing too much for them, and to understand that behavior is goal directed, and the kids don't ask for what makes a child behave or misbehave, ask what is he trying to accomplish. So parents begin to realize, and our teachers begin to realize, we need to stop making misbehavior useful for our children, and we equip them with techniques to do that, and also to help them understand a misbehaving child is a discouraged child, and so not to add to the discouragement, but instead to find ways to communicate to our children that you're okay. You're the kind of human being I enjoy being around. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the things, some of our goals, and the centers still exist. My wife retired some years ago, but our oldest girl, who is a fine early childhood educator, she operates 4 of them in Columbia. Mm-hmm. So that's something about how we brought Adlerian psychology to the community, and these could be replicated. There's only a few such Adlerian child care centers around the world, but there's no reason why they couldn't continue to be built and spread.
Indeed. It's interesting to me, as I'm listening to you talk about, parent education, that the popular parent education programs that exist in certainly the United States and North America and increasingly in Europe. And that would be, active parenting, positive discipline, systematic training for effective parenting. These are all theories that are grounded specifically in Adlerian-Dreikersian principles. So people often get trained in these strategies and don't understand the broader perspective. And wouldn't it be actually wonderful if people, rather than just seeing this as parent training, saw this really as a way of living life?
It would be a gift that trainers in these various specially named programs that are based entirely on Adlerian principles, and I don't think any of them would be talking about or teaching anything inconsistent with Adlerian principles. But it's a gift to people to also tell them, here's where we got this, here's where it came from.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not limited to listening to me. There's so many other books and pieces of research and places you can go to study. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and this is really how it relates to our ability to live with one another now and into the future. So it would be nice if people understood this a little further. I want to ask you something else. You're one of the individuals who has had the opportunity to work with Dreikers. How about sharing with us a little bit your experience of working with Dr. D?
Well, it would be incorrect to give the idea that I was his best friend. I was just one of 23 people in the class. I was a very young PhD. I had the idea that he was somewhat happy to have this PhD in his class.
Yeah.
And I came to class the first time in Chicago. I was a little bit late, and so he went to me to say, tell us a little bit about yourself, and I did. And one of the things I said, which was true at the time, is that I was in counselor education.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Dreikers did not mince any words. He did not beat around the bush, ever.
Yeah.
So he interrupted me and he said, counselor education is bankrupt. And I said, well, we've got some things to learn. He said, I said counselor education is bankrupt. So he didn't want me to misunderstand, just like he didn't when he worked with clients. He was forthright, but he could do that, and people loved him, respected him. Paul, when we were training with him and sitting beside him, he might say, if you were going too slowly or not really understanding as well as he'd like you to understand,
right.
He might say, let's get Paul out of here and get somebody in here who knows what they're doing. And
try that strategy.
And maybe there was a tear here and there, but nobody ever left. We felt like, aren't we fortunate to be with this man? So he had such insight, and I loved that he always taught, always a demonstration, and that's the way, really important way to teach. But when I talk about his insight, one time a mother came in, and she sat down, and she went, he said, don't say anything else. And he proceeded to explain her present private logic and thinking, just based on her saying, which now probably we could do some of that. You and I could do some of that.
Reminds me of Harold Mozak saying that he's gotten so good at lifestyle assessment he barely needs the patient anymore. Yeah.
Well, I don't know what else I could say about Dr. D, as we called him, with affection. I'll tell you this, if he had retired at 70, which he certainly could have retired and gone fishing or something, I would have never met him. So I always appreciated the fact that he was still around when I met him when he was 72 or 73 or whatever. I think he died when he was 76, but he never really quit working. And so it's a nice model. You know, even if you or I are a little bit slow to learn, we you learn over a period of time. You learn some things, and it becomes generous, almost a responsibility to pass that on. If you still can do the job, and so while we can, I think it behooves those of us who have been around for a while to keep teaching. But that was a gift from Dr. Dreikers that he continued to work.
Yeah, I think we make a contribution as much as we can, as long as we can, to be sure. We're still away time from lunch at this institute, but let me ask you one more question. And this is something that's sort of curious to me. Why do you suppose that as reasonable and rational as this theory is, and as accessible as it is, why is it not the standard in psychology? What happened?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me is that there are probably more people using Adlerian psychology in the state of South Carolina than any other psychology. Now, what I'm talking about is teachers and parents who through the years have at one place or another been exposed to it. So I'm not so unhappy about that, but we do see that often in academic institutions there will be little or no Adlerian psychology taught.
Exactly.
And you've been in academia more than me, but I certainly see it sometimes when an Adlerian is brought into a faculty, the students begin to realize, whoa, this really makes sense.
Yes.
And they want to take courses with him.
Yes.
And sadly, there's a tremendous competition in academia, and other faculty members kind of make it their business to move the other fella out or make it difficult for him.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to say about that. The freestanding institutions sometimes are of help, those Alfred Adler Institutes here and there. But we have a lot of action going on around the United States and elsewhere. I mean, look at Romania. When I first started working in Romania, in a small town up in St. George, in Cavazna, that was the only game in the nation, the only Adlerian.
Right.
And now, you and many of our colleagues have worked around the country. There must be maybe three Adlerian organizations, maybe more.
Yeah.
So it's
In Romania.
just in Romania.
Just in Romania.
Yeah. So it's easy to forget that when, especially for us in the United States, when we look at the local state university and say, well, where are the Adlerian courses? Well, often they're not there. And so I would just say, let us keep doing our institutes, our short courses, and other ways make the material available. I don't have to tell you, it's really important. I don't know if it's an obligation, but it's certainly, if you care about fellow human beings, you know we got to do what we can to keep spreading these ideas.
Yeah, we'll keep doing it. It is interesting to me that as I listen, read, the contemporary literature, it's quite often just validating the ideas that were presented by Adler over 100 years ago. I'm just sometimes saddened when I look at the references and don't see his name.
Yeah.
But good ideas are good ideas, and I guess eventually mainstream might catch up to it.
Yeah, that is a little disappointing sometime when you can see, surely you know where that came from.
Yeah.
That came from Adler, and yet, as you say, the credit's not given. But anyway, rather than focus too much on that, we need to give the credit and carry on and enjoy the improvement that's made, and I think tie it into the peace and harmony and cooperation in your school, in your city, in your state, in the country. That's a tremendous motivator if you can see it that way, and it's easy for me to see that way. I truly do believe it.
Yep. Yep. Well, we really are all in this together, so we're gonna have to figure out how to make it work.
Yes.
Yeah.
I appreciate what you're doing. Thanks for inviting me here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we ought to go get some lunch.
I think it would be a good idea.
All right. Thanks, Frank. Appreciate it.